The crystal chandeliers of Willowbrook Manor cast flawless shadows across imported marble floors as Catherine Richmond adjusted her pearl necklace. She surveyed the luxury-assisted living facility with the satisfaction of someone who had purchased peace of mind along with premium elder care. At 38, she commanded respect draped in designer suits, shielded by inherited authority. Her Chanel handbag rested like armor against the harsh truths of aging and mortality. "Mrs. Richmond, your mother is having another difficult morning," announced Director Helen Morrison, her voice carrying the well-practiced sympathy reserved for affluent families navigating the final stages of dementia. The administrative office smelled of expensive furniture, polish, and discreet floral arrangements, everything carefully designed to obscure the institutional core beneath its elegant facade. Catherine's manicured fingers tightened around her coffee cup as she absorbed the latest development in her mother's decline. Eleanor Richmond had once been the cornerstone of their family's social status. Watching her slowly fade felt like witnessing the erosion of everything Catherine had anchored her identity to. "What kind of difficulties?" she asked, her voice composed, betraying none of the constant anxiety that had shadowed her since the Alzheimer's diagnosis 2 years earlier. "Is she refusing medication again?" Helen consulted her leather portfolio with theatrical concern, the kind of performance that helped justify Willowbrook's astronomical fees. "She's been increasingly agitated, especially with our male staff. Just yesterday, she threw water at Marcus Williams during her morning care routine." Marcus Williams. Catherine's eyebrows arched with poised disdain, the name triggering unspoken assumptions passed down along with her trust fund. "I was very clear only female nurses are to attend to my mother. She comes from a generation that values propriety and personal boundaries. Mrs. Richmond, Marcus is one of our most experienced caregivers," Helen replied, treading the careful line between deference and professionalism. "He has over 15 years of memory care experience, and his approach to agitation is remarkably gentle." Catherine gave a sharp, polished laugh, laced with the effortless condescension of someone well-versed in the art of social exclusion. "I'm sure he's perfectly adequate for your usual residence, but my mother requires a higher standard. She needs caregivers who understand refinement and who share her background." The coded language hovered between them like an expensive fragrance, unspoken, but unmistakable. Catherine had learned early that certain lines weren't meant to be crossed, that social boundaries existed for a reason. "Perhaps we can arrange for additional female staff," Helen offered diplomatically, her words reflecting years of experience in managing high-maintenance families. "That would be best," Catherine replied coolly, already rehearsing how she'd explain this latest disruption to her country club friends. "My mother deserves to maintain her dignity during this difficult time. Hello, my Stop Racism family. Thank you for tuning in today. Before we dive deeper into the story, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments below, and I'd love to know your thoughts. What did you think of the story so far? Let us know. We read every comment, and your words keep us inspired to create more meaningful content. Let's hit 50 comments on this video. Your support means everything to us. The Richmond Estates dining room had seen for generations of carefully curated conversations about social propriety and class boundaries. But Tuesday night's dinner carried a heavier weight. Catherine sat across from her sister, Margaret, the polished mahogany table between them reflecting their mutual concern for their mother's condition. "You look exhausted," Margaret remarked gently. Candlelight from the Viennese chandelier, one their great-great-grandmother had imported, danced in her perfectly coiffed auburn hair. At 42, Margaret represented everything Catherine aspired to, poised through a carefully arranged marriage, powerful through strategic philanthropy, and utterly secure in her social standing. Catherine sipped from a crystal glass that had survived 2 world wars, savoring a vintage wine priced higher than most people's rent. Their conversation, like the wine, would not be easy, but it was necessary. Eleanor nodded slowly, allowing Marcus to help her sit up. With gentle precision, he brushed her silver hair, a gesture so tender, it unsettled Catherine. No other staff member had shown such care. The moment was so unexpectedly profound that Catherine felt the foundations of her long-held assumptions begin to fracture under the weight of undeniable truth. That night, her penthouse apartment felt more like a mausoleum. The sleek white walls and modern art reflected her disorientation back at her from every polished surface. She sat stiffly on her Italian leather sofa, still in her work clothes armor that had failed to shield her from reality's intrusion. Images of Marcus tending to her mother replayed like silent film reels in her mind. His calm voice narrating each action, his respectful demeanor, the way he treated Eleanor not as a burden but as a dignified woman, all of it clashed with the biases Catherine had never thought to question. His practiced hands displayed a competence no other caregiver had matched. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "How's Mother today? I hope the facility is finally providing appropriate staff." Appropriate staff. The words, so natural yesterday, now felt like a bitter aftertaste in her thoughts. What had made Marcus inappropriate? Only her own assumptions about who belonged in her mother's space, and who didn't. She poured herself a glass of wine, an expensive vintage that likely cost more than Marcus earned in a week. But the wine tasted wrong. Each sip reminded her of country club conversations, where she and Margaret had discussed service and propriety as if they were universal truths. Instead of dismissing the memory, she replayed the day's events, searching for a reason to reinforce her old beliefs, but none came. What returned was Marcus's quiet competence, his clear understanding of dementia, his ability to soothe Eleanor in ways the trained female nurses had never managed. Her reflection in the glass windows showed a woman clad in privileged uncertainty she no longer felt. Superiority, she realized, was a story she'd inherited, built on illusions of class and ignorance. Outside, city lights twinkled like the unanswered questions she'd always avoided, questions about worth, value, and the true nature of dignity. She thought again of her mother's calm face as Marcus had cared for her. For the first time in months, Eleanor had looked peaceful. Maybe dignity wasn't about pedigree or protocol, but about presence and skill. That realization struck Catherine with surgical precision. She had been confusing comfort with correctness, appearance with ability. Tomorrow, she would return to Willowbrook. She would face the man she had dismissed. And for the first time in her life, Catherine Richmond would confront a version of herself she didn't recognize, one not cloaked in designer labels or inherited beliefs. The family portrait on the wall, once a symbol of legacy, now looked like a mirror showing how much she still had to learn. Friday morning, Catherine arrived at Willowbrook earlier than usual, her sleep broken by restless thoughts. As she walked the hallways, she noticed things she'd never truly seen before, how the facility functioned like a delicate ecosystem. She looked past uniforms and titles, past surface roles, and into the human engine that kept everything running. In the sunroom, she found Marcus reading to a group of elderly residents. His voice animated classic literature with theatrical precision, drawing laughter and recognition from faces typically clouded by confusion. Where others might have seen decline, Marcus cultivated connection. Mr. Williams called Mrs. Patterson, a 90-year-old former teacher whose family rarely visited. "Can you read the part about the garden again? It reminds me of my grandmother's roses." Catherine watched Marcus smile with genuine warmth, turning back to the page. His cadence slowed not in condescension, but in consideration of their listeners' rhythms. His voice wasn't just reading, it was reaching. "Mrs. Richmond," Marcus said, when he noticed her in the doorway, standing up with respectful poise, not deference. "Good morning. Just finishing story time with our literature enthusiasts." The residents turned and gave Catherine polite nods before returning to Marcus, clearly preferring the connection he provided to her more formal presence. Their affection for him directly contradicted her earlier assumptions about professional boundaries. "Mr. Williams," she said quietly, after the residents were led away, "I owe you an apology. Your care for my mother was exceptional." Marcus looked up from the books he was sorting, his face calm but wary. "Thank you, Mrs. Richmond. I'm just glad she's resting more peacefully. I was wrong to assume your gender made you unsuitable," Catherine admitted, forcing out words that felt both foreign and freeing. "We all make assumptions," Marcus replied, his tone steady and composed. "The real question is whether we're willing to challenge them when the evidence proves us wrong." There was no bitterness in his voice, no triumph, just the earned dignity of someone who had learned to meet prejudice with grace. As he organized the books, Catherine noticed medical journals tucked beneath titles on advanced geriatric care and dementia, quiet testament to his expertise. "Marcus," she said impulsively, "would you be willing to be my mother's primary caregiver? She responds to you in a way no one else has." The smile that lit his face felt like sunrise after a long storm, illuminating possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. Saturday evening brought family dinner, but it felt more like a tribunal. Catherine sat across from Margaret, at the same mahogany table their grandmother had used to enforce decades of decorum. Crystal stemware caught the light from ancestral chandeliers, reflecting tradition's weight. "I cannot believe what Helen Morrison told me," Margaret began, her voice cold, with controlled outrage. Her manicured fingers gripped her wineglass like a blade. Catherine barely touched her food. "If you're referring to Marcus Williams, he's providing excellent care. Mother is calmer than she's been in months. Comfortable." Margaret's laugh was brittle. "Catherine, having a strange man attend to mother's intimate needs isn't comfort. It's a violation of everything she taught us about boundaries, about propriety." The argument Catherine had been silently rehearsing all week now formed into words she'd never dared speak. What if our ideas of propriety are less important than mother's actual well-being? Margaret's face reddened, her voice rising. "How dare you question our family's values? We've maintained our dignity for generations by understanding the proper distance between ourselves and the help." "The help?" Catherine echoed, testing the phrase like a diagnosis. "Marcus isn't the help. He's a skilled professional, more competent and more respectful than anyone else we've employed." "That's exactly the problem," Margaret snapped, her carefully cultured voice cracking. "The moment you start seeing service people as equals, you destroy the boundaries that protect our family's reputation and mother's dignity." But Catherine saw it clearly now. It was never about dignity. It was about control. And she was finally ready to let that go. Catherine felt something shift, deep in her chest, loosening of constraints she had worn like inherited jewelry. Beautiful, yes, but ultimately binding. What if those boundaries weren't protecting mother at all, but keeping her from receiving the care she truly needed? Margaret leaned forward across the table, like a predator scenting vulnerability. "Catherine, you're being manipulated," she said sharply. "These people know exactly which emotional buttons to push. They're trained to make wealthy families feel grateful dependent. Even these people." The phrase echoed in Catherine's mind, now carrying the sour aftertaste of everything she was beginning to question. Her voice steadied as she responded, months of silent doubts finally rising to the surface. "Marcus Williams has 15 years of experience in memory care. His qualifications and compassion aren't manipulation, they're professionalism." Margaret's expression iced over. "Mark my words," she replied, each syllable like a warning bell. "This man will bring trouble into our family. People like him always do, no matter how skilled they pretend to be." Catherine stared at her sister, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time. The woman across from her, so polished and poised, bore a face shaped by the same unspoken prejudices that had governed their family for generations. Tuesday evening, Catherine found herself in Willowbrook Manor's quiet garden. The gentle hum of nightfall provided a backdrop to her thoughts about her mother's decline, and her own unraveling certainty about the world she'd taken for granted. Marcus Williams appeared along the winding path, his shift clearly finished, but his pace unhurried. He paused when he saw her. "Mrs. Richmond," he said softly, surprised but not displeased. "I didn't expect to see you here so late." Catherine gestured to the bench beside her, needing honest conversation more than polished decorum. "Marcus," she began, dropping the formality for the first time, "may I ask you something personal?" He sat down with careful, respectful distance, signaling both professionalism and openness. "Of course." She stared ahead, afraid to meet his eyes. "How do you stay so patient when people treat you poorly?" Her voice trembled, emotion rising beneath the surface. "I've watched you with my mother, with other residents. You show such grace I don't understand." Marcus took a moment to answer, considering her words with the same thoughtful presence she had observed in every interaction. The garden lights caught in his eyes, illuminating their shared silence. "May I ask," he said gently, "why that matters to you?" Catherine turned to him, eyes glassy with tears. "Because I've been one of those people," she admitted. "I've judged you unfairly, based on things that had nothing to do with who you are. But watching you care for my mother, I realize I've been wrong about everything." "Catherine," Marcus said, quietly using her first name for the first time, creating a space for vulnerability she hadn't known she needed. "When was the last time you felt peaceful about your mother's condition?" The question cut straight through her defenses. "I haven't," she whispered. "Not since the diagnosis. I've been so focused on control and appearances that I lost sight of what she really needs." "And what does she need?" Marcus asked, without judgment. "She needs someone who sees her as a whole person," Catherine said, the truth breaking loose like light through fog, "not just a collection of symptoms. Someone who treats her with dignity, even when she's confused or afraid." Marcus nodded, his expression calm, accepting not pitying. "Your mother is lucky to have a daughter who cares enough to examine her own assumptions." The simple statement struck her with the quiet force of grace, washing away weeks of guilt and shame. Catherine looked at him, rarely looked, and felt something soften. "Marcus," she said impulsively, would you have dinner with me sometime?" She gave a shy smile. "I'd like to understand more about your approach to memory care." His smile, warm and genuine, lit the garden more than the lights above them. For the first time, Catherine saw the boundaries between them not as walls, but as doors. Wednesday morning exploded into crisis. Catherine arrived at Willowbrook Manor to find chaos. Nurses and aides moved with urgent purpose. Eleanor Richmond was in respiratory distress, her condition deteriorating fast. Panic had replaced protocol. "Mrs. Richmond, we've called her physician," Helen Morrison informed her, her usual administrative poise crumbling under pressure. "But her breathing is worsening. She's refusing anyone who tries to help." Catherine raced to her mother's room. Eleanor lay in bed, gasping, her eyes wide and wild with fear. She didn't recognize her daughter, only the primal terror of a body turning against itself. "Mother, please," Catherine whispered, reaching for her hand. But Eleanor pulled away, rejecting even her daughter's touch. The connection between them, always fragile, seemed to shatter completely in that moment of panic. Catherine's heart pounded. All the polished theories about control and status dissolved into raw desperation. She turned to the nurse. "Where's Marcus? Help you." "You're going to be all right," Catherine whispered, but Eleanor's agitation only worsened with every attempt at comfort. Her breathing grew shallower, more rapid, as medical staff hovered ineffectively, their efforts unable to penetrate her fear. Catherine stood frozen, helpless, as the standard protocols failed. Despite everyone's best intentions, her mother's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Then, Mrs. Richmond, Marcus Williams appeared in the doorway, his calm presence cutting through the chaos like a bomb. Something in his bearing, authority, grounded, compassions, steadied the room. "May I try something different?" he asked gently. Catherine nodded frantically. In that moment, any lingering prejudice dissolved beneath her desperation to see her mother breathe. Marcus approached Eleanor's bedside with deliberate slowness. His voice, low and warm, reached through her panic like a lifeline. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said softly, using her name with intimate, respectful familiarity. "I know you're frightened, but I'm here to help you breathe easier. Would you let me sit with you for a moment?" Eleanor's wild eyes found Marcus's face. Something in it, his tone, his stillness, calmed her more than oxygen or sedatives ever had. Gradually, her breath began to slow. "That's beautiful, Mrs. Eleanor," Marcus said, gently easing her into a more comfortable position. "You're doing so well. Let's make breathing even easier now." Under his gentle guidance, Eleanor accepted the oxygen mask she'd fought moments ago, trusting Marcus in a way she hadn't trusted anyone else. Her panic ebbed, her breathing stabilized. Catherine felt tears spill down her cheeks. This man, whom she had once viewed with suspicion, possessed something more powerful than credentials, the ability to see another person, even through the fog of fear and confusion. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Marcus met her gaze, quiet dignity etched across his face. To him, this wasn't heroism. It was simply what he did. Thursday afternoon, Catherine sat quietly in her mother's room, watching Marcus care for Eleanor, with a combination of competence and tenderness that had become her mother's anchor in an unmoored world. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating a truth Catherine could no longer deny. What her mother needed was not status or luxury, but presence, patience, dignity. "Mrs. Eleanor," Marcus asked gently, holding a worn leather-bound volume, "would you like me to read from your poetry book?" Eleanor nodded eagerly, her face alight with rare anticipation. The volume had been with her since college, an old companion from brighter days. Marcus began to read an Elizabeth Barrett Browning sonnet, his voice infusing each line with appreciation and quiet reverence. Catherine sat in the corner chair, transfixed. Somehow, Marcus had come to know her mother's rhythms, her preferences, better than family members who had known her for decades. As the final lines of the sonnet settled into the stillness of the room, Catherine's voice broke the silence. "Marcus," she said softly, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you recognition for what you've given my mother. Dignity, where I thought it was impossible." He looked up, surprised by the sudden acknowledgement. She continued before he could respond. "You've shown me that care isn't about prestige or protocol. It's about seeing someone, really seeing them." "Mrs. Richmond," he said after a moment, closing the book carefully, "caring for your mother has been a privilege. She's taught me as much as I've helped her." "What has she taught you?" Catherine asked, honestly curious, no longer seeking answers through filters of superiority or fear. "That grace and intelligence survive, even when memory fails," Marcus replied. "She may not remember our conversations, but she feels kindness. She responds to respect. That's why I do this." Tears gathered again in Catherine's eyes, this time not from helplessness, but from recognition of a profound truth. "Marcus," she said, impulse becoming decision, "would you consider becoming my mother's private caregiver? I know it would mean leaving Willowbrook, but I'd make sure your compensation reflects your real value." His smile was quiet and radiant, like morning sunlight through a stormed-out sky. "I'd be honored, Catherine," he replied, using her first name with warmth that stirred something new and startling in her. "Your mother deserves to be surrounded by people who see her for who she truly is." As Eleanor dozed between them, her face calm, her breathing steady, Catherine realized Marcus had become far more than a caregiver. He had become her teacher, He had shown her how to look beyond walls, built over generations. How to find the humanity within reach. "There's something else," she said, heart thudding with possibility. "I've been thinking that my mother's care is only the beginning of what I'd like to learn from you." Friday morning arrived like a courtroom summons. The family meeting took place in the Richmonds' formal sitting room, beneath the cold stares of oil-painted ancestors. Portraits of women who had kept the family's boundaries intact for 4 generations through wealth, pride, and exclusion looked down from the walls. Catherine stood beside the fireplace, once a symbol of everything she was taught to preserve. "Catherine, this has gone too far," Margaret declared, arms crossed, voice edged in steel. "Bringing that man into our family home crosses every line of appropriate behavior." But Catherine stood tall, no longer seeking permission to see the world differently. "I know," she said, "and I crossed it on purpose." Compassion over comfort. "Marcus Williams is moving into the guest cottage this afternoon," Catherine announced, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "He'll be providing full-time care for Mother in familiar surroundings, where she feels safe and valued." "You cannot be serious," Margaret gasped, her perfectly curated composure cracking like expensive makeup under summer humidity. "What will people say when they find out you're living with the help? Our reputation will be destroyed." "Our reputation," Catherine repeated, tasting the phrase like bitter medicine that promised long overdue healing. "Margaret, what if our reputation has been built on values that blind us to true worth?" Margaret scoffed, her laugh sharp, enough to shatter crystal. "Genuine worth. Catherine, you're being manipulated. He knows exactly how to exploit lonely, guilt-ridden, wealthy women." But Catherine felt the final chains of inherited prejudice fall away like autumn leaves, making room for something honest to grow. "I'm not lonely, Margaret. For the first time in months, I feel hopeful because someone is caring for Mother, in a way that sees her, not just her condition." "This is about more than Mother," Margaret snapped, panic rising in her voice. "You're developing feelings for this man and it's clouding your judgment." "You're right," Catherine said, surprising even herself with the clarity of her admission. "I am developing feelings for Marcus Williams, because he's shown me what authentic kindness looks like, what genuine competence means, what real strength is." Margaret went pale. Her sister's rejection of everything they were raised to believe struck like a blow. "Catherine, you can't throw away 4 generations of family standing for some romantic fantasy about crossing social lines." "I'm not throwing anything away," Catherine replied firmly. "I'm choosing love over prejudice, authentic connection over inherited assumptions, real worth over social pretension." She crossed to the window. In the garden below, Marcus was arranging furniture in the guest cottage, preparing a sanctuary where dignity could flourish in spite of disease. His movements were purposeful, tender. "Margaret," Catherine said, turning back to her sister's shocked face, "I know this challenges everything we were taught, but watching Marcus care for Mother has shown me that real class comes from character, not inheritance." 6 months later, the cottage garden was blooming again, this time with a quiet joy that no longer required approval. Catherine sat on the bench, watching Marcus guide Eleanor's hand toward a rose she no longer remembered planting. "Mrs. Eleanor, feel how soft this one is," Marcus said gently, placing her fingers on the velvet petals. "They're just like the roses from your childhood garden, remember?" Eleanor's eyes sparkled not with clarity of memory, but with something deeper. The emotional truth that she was still valued, still loved. "She's having more good moments lately," Catherine said. Joining them on the bench Marcus had made more comfortable for Eleanor's frequent visits. "Or maybe we've just learned how to create more of them." "We all have good moments," Marcus replied, "when we're surrounded by love." His arms slipped around her shoulders, the easy intimacy of 2 people who had built their affection, slowly through mutual care and quiet endurance. Not fantasy or impulse. Catherine had come to understand that real love meant seeing people clearly, not through the lens of expectation, but of empathy. "Catherine," Marcus said after a pause, "there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." She turned, not with apprehension, but with anticipation, eagerness, born of partnership, not performance. "I've been thinking about expanding our care model," he said, his voice alight with purpose. "There are so many families struggling with memory care who could benefit from what we've done here with your mother." Her heart swelled with pride. "Marcus Williams," she said softly, "you never stop thinking about how to help people, do you?" His laughter was warm, as comforting as the golden autumn light, and when he kissed her among the roses, Eleanor no longer remembered. Catherine felt her old life dissolve into something new and entirely true. "Mrs. Eleanor," Marcus said, gently, including her in the moment, "what do you think about Catherine and me working together to help more families?" Eleanor smiled, radiant despite her confusion. For a brief, beautiful instant, lucidity returned. "Love," she said clearly, "is always the right answer." Catherine reached for her mother's hand and squeezed Marcus's in the same breath. The three of them, bound not by convention, but by choice, by care, and compassion, and courage. She had once believed that proper care required a certain background, a certain polish, but her greatest joy now came from watching a man society might overlook bring her mother back to life, one breath, one touch, one poem at a time. Prejudice, she had learned, was just fear in formal wear. Love was the courage to see people clearly and value them accordingly. In the distance, Margaret's car occasionally appeared at the estate gates, but Catherine no longer looked toward it for approval. Peace, she'd discovered, didn't come from tradition or applause. It came from living a life aligned with truth.